It was part of the big bond issue back in 1923 when St. Louisans voted to build a memorial to those who died in the Great World War. But the $6 million they approved wasn't nearly enough, and it took 15 years to complete the Soldiers' Memorial. It officially opened to the public on Memorial Day of 1938. A little more than a year later, World War II broke out in Europe, and America would be in that war by the end of 1941. Well, we use this place and this day as an opportunity to tell some of the stories of World War II and St. Louis. Not stories from the battlefields, but stories from the home front. St. Louis was moving to a new rhythm as the 1940s began, upbeat, lively. There were new jobs opening up, and people were coming to the city to fill them. It seems now such a short period of time, this transition from depression to war. But time enough for people to begin to think that things were looking pretty good, even if the warning signs of what was coming were all around them. A lot of the new jobs were in factories making military goods. And every week at the movies, the newsreels brought the sights and sounds of the war in Europe. But it wasn't our war yet.
I don't think any of us really realized that there would actually be a war, because England was at war, but we thought that we could stay out of it.
Even as America began drafting men into the military in 1940, it maintained its neutrality in the war. And a lot of Americans maintained their optimism about our chances of staying out of it.
So we thought the best idea was to volunteer and get that year over with. So I did. I volunteered and joined the Army in February of 41, fully expecting to be back on the job in February of 42. But Pearl Harbor, you know, was December the 7th, and that ended that idea.
We were at the intersection of Grand and Gravois. We were on our way to dinner in the afternoon on Sunday. The radio was on, and they announced that Pearl Harbor had been attacked by Japanese aircraft.
We were on our way home from visiting my in-laws.
Well, I was sitting, should I say, with a friend of mine in the corridor of the second floor of St. John's.
I was on the street. In fact, it was Jefferson Street, Jefferson and Pine.
And I was just devastated by the news, and everybody was shocked.
And not really knowing what that was all about, I did know that everybody was paying attention.
And we said, what is Pearl Harbor?
Then we started listening to the radio, and it was all grim and everything, but it came to me that Pearl Harbor was the naval base in Hawaii.
December 7th, 1941, when Japanese treachery plunged us into worldwide war.
It's too easy to imagine that we went into World War II a united country. We became a united country in the course of the war, but there was great opposition to our entering into it prior to Pearl Harbor. And there was a great deal of doubt as to what the outcome of this war might be.
It was scary. It was really frightening. You thought the world was going to end right there. I think that that's why everybody was running to the church, praying to God, help our country. I remember my brother, 17 years old, thought he was going to go out and save the world. And his friend, too, had gone in with him. And they went down to Market Street. And that was where the recruitment station was. And my mother and father followed them up to Union Station, crying the whole way.
And as soon as her nursing training was completed, Marie Long joined her brother and her sister in the service as a Navy nurse. After Pearl Harbor, Bud Meissner was immediately shipped from Arkansas to California to defend against possible invasion. Chris Newman volunteered and was accepted into fighter pilot training at the Army Air Corps Flying School at Tuskegee, Alabama.
I knew that I was 1A, and well, I frankly wasn't afraid. My father had been in the Army. He was in World War I.
But this World War would be much bigger, longer, and costlier, requiring greater commitment by those in the service and by those left behind at home. They too would be asked to serve their country in less dangerous, less glamorous ways. But over here and over there, St. Louisans in World War II had to face new situations and challenges and learn new survival skills. Newlyweds Viv and Lois Lewis were like thousands of young couples, pulled apart by the war just as they were starting their lives together. They had married after high school in DeSoto, Missouri, and moved to the big city and got jobs and a small apartment on Delmar. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Viv got drafted, and they stayed together as long as they could.
And then came time that he was to be sent overseas. And we'd been married then almost 3 years, and I found out that I was pregnant. In fact, the last letter I got from him, just before that, it said that he didn't know what island he was being shipped to, and he didn't know when that he'd be able to ride again. And, well, it was a very unusual, sad disappointment, to get that kind of news, because I had no idea when I'd see or hear from him again.
When people had men go into the service, regardless of which branch, they would put a flag in their window with a star for every member of the family that went in.
If it was a blue star, there was a man in the service. And if it was a gold star, that person had died in the line of duty.
There were 5 stars in a window of an apartment on St. Louis Avenue, and it made all the papers, not just because the Nolfo family had 5 boys in the Army, but because their Sicilian immigrant parents had had to register as enemy aliens at the outbreak of the war. This was a nation, a city of immigrants, and many servicemen were first-generation Americans. And Maria Nolfo made it clear to the newspaper reporters that she was an American, too.
My grandma, she was proud, She had all of her sons but one in the military, and they were fighting for America, fighting for what she said was her home, and no matter what it took, her family would fight for her home.
Most local boys went off to war with no pictures in the paper, no fanfare, just a goodbye at Union Station. They left behind their friends and their family, their hometown, their old lives. They also left behind thousands of job openings, and filling the factories now was as important to the outcome of the war as filling the trenches.
In this total war, the division between the front, the battle front, the home front, disappeared. It was more difficult in some respects to find people with critical civilian skills than it was to find people who were prepared to die for the country. It makes war a lot less glamorous than it is usually represented. These most mundane kinds of skills then were really critical to the war's outcome.
There were terrific labor shortages and skill shortages. Trying to get people that were qualified to do that kind of work, such as welding and all that, was very difficult.
Bud Meissner's father ran the St. Louis Car Company, which had been making streetcars and railroad cars since the 1890s. In the Depression, things had been lean, production and employment way down. And then what happened began to happen all over the city and the country. The military orders started rolling in, and the car company was taking on as much work as it could handle. First came the orders for specialized rail cars for hauling ammunition. Then the car company got into the airplane business, building trainers at its North Side plant. Then they retooled a production line to make for the U.S. Navy new kinds of armored vehicles, nicknamed the Alligator and the Water Buffalo.
These were landing vehicles bought by the Navy but for the use of the Marines in the Pacific area, and were very important in making those landings, because when they hit the beach they could keep going because they were tracked.
With Navy officials on hand, they demonstrated the new vehicle in Spanish Lake in North County. St. Louis, with its factories and rail and river connections, quickly became one of the country's major defense suppliers. 3/4 of the local factories had some kind of military orders to fill. American soldiers rode in tanks made in Granite City. They flew dive bombers built at the Curtiss Wright plant at Lambert Field. They might be wearing shoes, uniforms, and helmets and eating rations made in St. Louis. One local firm had a contract with the Navy for metal bunk bed frames. Another was making sailors' caps and bell-bottoms. Somewhere over Europe, Americans were sitting in airplane turrets made at Emerson Electric, firing bullets manufactured at the huge U.S. cartridge plant on North Good Friday.